Good evening. I'm Randy Anderson. On behalf of the leadership team at Science, Scripture, and Reason, I'd like to welcome you all to our January 2026 meeting. We are delighted to have an old friend with us, Ken Wolgemuth. And Ken was here in April of last year and spoke on the fine tuning of the Earth. He actually started in outer space, but ended up on the Earth. So it was a great talk, and I would commend you all, if you haven't seen it or don't remember it, to go on our website, which is www.ssreason.org. And we have most of our past sessions recorded. So I encourage you particularly to view Ken's talk then. For those of you who don't know Ken, he founded Solid Rock Lectures to communicate the wonder of God's handiwork in geology. He has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Wheaton College and a PhD in Geochemistry from Columbia University, and a 40-year career in the petroleum industry. He was drawn into Christian worldview apologetics 2 decades ago and became a Colson Fellow in 2017. He's given numerous lectures about creation and co-authored the 2018 paper on radiocarbon dating, which was published in ASA's Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. He is a contributing author to the groundbreaking book written expressly for the church, which is The Grand Canyon, Monument to an Ancient Earth. Can Noah's Flood Explain the Grand Canyon? And we're delighted to have Ken tonight to speak on that topic. It's a very important topic because there's a lot of controversy in the church now in terms of the age of the earth and the effect of the Noetic flood and where it was. So, Ken, thank you for coming. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me first offer a prayer up that the Holy Spirit would guide my words and your ears to hear, and that we'd have a good conversation together. Dear Lord in heaven, creator of the universe and the creator of us, and the one who arranged for that fabulous Grand Canyon that we've been able to go by and visit and go down. Some people go down into it and just enjoy your out of doors and the creativity that you put in to this earth and the fabulous places that we can visit, the Grand Canyon being one of the most significant ones. Be with my words as I communicate the work we did do and the book that we published about the Grand Canyon, primarily to bring glory to you and what you have done here on this earth. In the name of Jesus, amen. Well, I'm going to proceed right away and get full screen coverage there. Does that show up okay?
Yeah, yes.
Continue to share. Yeah. Okay. So last year I talked to you as he said on the fine tuning of the universe and then our Earth in terms of geology. So today we'll just focus right in on the Grand Canyon and pulling from the book that we wrote, which I have it here right in my hand to show. And I'll be showing you pictures of it then in content from the book. It's a good friend of mine that I found out just only in the last couple of weeks that the designer of this Grand Canyon banner that there is on the screen right now, where we selected the wording "Creation Story," Ancient Earth, and we have a magnificent creator. This is the banner that we used when we went to conventions and have an exhibit booth. And he's the one that created that, designed that for me. So in fact, it was for the last two Sunday evenings, I was at his church giving talks about creation, and particularly the fine tuning last week, and then 2 days ago in topics about common sense, awareness of how we find the passage of time as we look at creation. And one of those is included, we were looking at the Grand Canyon itself. I'm always reminded of Johannes Kepler in terms of what my activities are as I study creation. And his quote is poignant to me. The chief aim of all investigations of the external world should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed on it by God. And my sense is always, as I do my studies, that that is what I'm seeking to present with my audience. And I enjoy looking at this volcano on the Kamchatka Peninsula, with Psalm 104 mentioning that he touches the mountains and they smoke. And in this case, a little smoke coming out of the top of that. And then in Job, our Lord is inviting us to study his creation in this way from Job, or speak to the earth and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. So that's the invitation that's been a thrilling career spanning 40 to 50 years for me. Passages related to understanding the significance of creation in Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So we have the opportunity to have a sense of God's eternal power and nature from these things that we look at, and the Grand Canyon is one of those. So there's the cover of the book. These are the 4 people that were the editors. Ooh, I wanted to do let me back up and get my pointer here. There we go. Okay. So here are the 4 editors, and then the rest of us that are co-authors on the various chapters of the book. The chapters that I was involved in, I was a co-author with Brian Tapp on writing about plate tectonics and then the influence of faults in affecting the Grand Canyon. The book was expressly written for the church, as you will gather as I go ahead and step through this content. Greg Davidson is my colleague in Solid Rock Lectures, and he is the department chair of geology and geological engineering at Ole Miss, and he has the gifts as a professional geologist in the academy that he's skilled at writing proposals. And about 10 years ago, he wrote a proposal, and we had funding, pretty significant and good funding from monies that had come from the Templeton Foundation, which gave us the opportunity to go to seminaries and churches around the country as they would accept us, as we gave workshops over about a 3-year period to 20 or 25 different locations. The other friend of mine that's involved in Solid Rock Lectures is Joel Duff. He knows a lot of geology, but his primary first is biology. He's a professor at University of Akron in Ohio, and he has a website that he often does, puts videos up there of things that he has seen in biology and geology. So we become bonded very well together, the 3 of us sort of as a team. So the question is that I posed on the front of the book and as part of the title, can Noah's flood explain the Grand Canyon? And we deliberately put that title, that subtitle, because the young earth community that has a group of people that are called the flood geologists, or they propose ideas of flood geology, is that the rocks in the Grand Canyon and most of the sedimentary rocks in Utah were deposited in about 1 year by Noah's flood. And that's what we'll be addressing gradually as I step through the book. So I'll look at components in terms of how the book was inspired and received, then go through a summary of some of the contents, and then address that question, can Noah's flood explain it? And then finally, how should the church respond to these kind of activities of a number of young earth organizations to the church? So we'll start here and step on through. The instigator that really got us going is Carol Hill. She's a Christian geologist that lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And she's an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico there in Albuquerque. And as she worked with a number of research people, she herself has done work down in the canyon in developing some of the geological understanding of what we find there. She was aware that the young earth community was promoting heavily that this was formed by Noah's flood. And in fact, there's a small ministry that is called Canyon Ministries, and they take Christians who down through the canyon and describe the canyon in ways that are inaccurate, as I'll show some examples, and then trying to defend the case that Noah's flood could have done this. But I'll be talking about some of those ideas. So sometime around 2000, let's see, we published it in 2016, took us probably about 2010, roughly. She gave me a call and said, could we do something about developing a book? There had been some overtures to the American Scientific Affiliation, of which we are all members, which is a faith and science organization. To do something like this, but it just hadn't taken off before. But she corralled me, and then I connected with Greg Davidson, and we realized, yeah, this is something we should do. And we were able to find some funding for it, getting a team of people together to do the writing. And then one of the big blessings was that Greg Davidson had a semester of sabbatical. And when we had 11 different authors writing chapters, the first phases and the first draft of different chapters just didn't fit together very well. So Greg Davidson unpacked everything that was there and got it organized that it made one continuous story, so it flows together properly. And his work in editing or pulling it together in a logical way in terms of the chapter titles and things of that type are the thing that had made it quite good. All right. Carol had been watching the flood community for years, and they had books like this. Here are 5 of the books that they'd published about the Grand Canyon. The one that I focused in on and have bought and spent quite a bit of time on is this one. And there was things that I knew clearly about geology and geochemistry that are just inaccurately presented in that book. So I had reasons because of that and knowing what was in there that we felt we needed to do a book that tells a correct story of the canyon that has the integrity of speaking truthfully. So there's Carol Hill and I at the time when once it was finally completed in 2016, one of our editors was very active with the administration, or his wife actually worked on staff for a period of time. So he has his own books in the Grand Canyon bookstore. So he was able to get the connectivity for us to be able to actually come to the canyon on the Memorial Day weekend in 2016. And we had a exhibition there. Basically, we were book signing, and we were describing the books, and the people that come by, and they could pick up copies and buy copies, etc. And the book has been sold inside the Grand Canyon bookstore over these last 10 years. So there it is. The it We have eight of us of the 11 authors are Christians. There were several that agree, people who are not in the faith community that agreed to join us because we had some topics that we didn't know of a Christian geologist that could fill in some of those gaps. But each of the contributors that was not in the faith community were still sympathetic to what we were doing. Uh, we had funding donations from that American Scientific Affiliation, from BioLogos. It's been endorsed and sold by the Reasons to Believe folks out in California. And then the thing that really, my goal when we had it finally published is that I wanted to have a book. We needed a book, of course, in color. It has to be color. It's a book that is a great coffee table book with colors on just about every page. But I didn't want a book to be selling for $50 to $60. I wanted a book that would come in at something like $30, $35 so that it could be viably and basically bought by pastors and church people so that it wasn't comes out as high priced. So the Lord really blessed me with an opportunity to raise enough money from some individuals that I reached out to or who are geologists and I know well, and was able to raise about $25,000, $30,000, which covered the layout that we had, all the editing, all those processes, and paid for the first phase of the printing of the book, which then we had a very unique contract worked out with Kriegel Publishing that we basically took care of all the upside expenses, and then our contract as books were sold, the contract that was developed with them, then that contract monies come back into Solid Rock Lectures that we've used over these last 10 years. So there we are at the canyon. You can see the stacks of books there. And we ended up, those of us that were there signed a lot of those copies that were then available inside the bookstore for these years. And eventually, of course, the ones that we signed would be sold off, but they continue to sell it out there in the canyon. There's a autographed copy. That little symbol is one that the people there at the canyon had, and we were able to do our signatures on those in those books. So there's Greg Davidson talking to a couple then as we were there that Memorial Day weekend. We had one little piece of, I don't know how long it lasted, but it was an Amazon bestseller in geology in the category of Christian Old Testament references, #1 bestseller. Now, I don't know if that lasted 10 hours or a day or 2 days. I don't know how long it lasted. But anyway, it was a delight to somebody caught this. I think it was Tim Hebel, the guy who found many of our photographs that we put in the book, captured this one. So I couldn't help but put it in my talk that we were a bestseller for a little bit. All right. Well, here are some of the endorsements. Ken Keithley is a professor of theology at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he was one of the first seminary professors who invited Greg Davidson and I to come and participate in a conference one weekend. So that was one of those places that funding that we had from the proposal took care of. We could go to the seminaries without asking them to pay the expenses. So he says, here is a resource that not only demonstrates the superiority of an ancient earth interpretation of the Grand Canyon, but also testifies of God's grandeur and providence. This is a necessary textbook for any class on creation. And Ken Keithley is particularly interesting in my mind because he had a viewpoint of a young Earth for some number of years, and he transitioned, and he actually has written a short paper about the reasons why he transitioned from a young Earth view to an old Earth view. Here's from Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell's son, and is now a professor at the seminary in California. The Grand Canyon book is an important and well-researched book. The authors do careful scientific work to show how the geological record testifies to an old Earth. Their work deserves a fair hearing by anyone interested in the question of the age of the Earth and the geological record. This is the one I appreciate the most because David Montgomery is a professor at University of Washington, and he is not in the faith community. But I asked him to read the book, and I asked him for an endorsement because a couple of years before he had published a book that he titled "The Rocks Don't Lie: A Geologist Investigates Noah's Flood." And what David did is he looked at the cultures, all the cultures that he could find around the world that have a flood story in their history. And then he shows the examples of each flood that has happened wherever it is going to leave behind the evidence of the nature of the deposition of those sediments and what they're like, how they're formed. So he has a great title, "The Rocks Don't Lie," and likewise, as I will be showing you here in the Grand Canyon, the rocks don't lie about whether it was a flood deposit or whether it was sequential and many different sedimentary time periods as the seas came and covered over this area. So he writes, this book allows this marvelous landform to tell its own story, walking the reader through an illustrated guide to the geologic trail exposed in the canyon walls, a must-read for anyone interested in the direct testimony of creation itself on the history of the world. And what caught my attention is David gave me that record with a capital C, which I certainly would not expect that somebody who was not in the faith community would do, but he did it. And so I have the freedom to share it that way with you folks. There are several different organizations that are active at the canyon that seek to present or go ahead and present a flood geology viewpoint. And this is one of them that they have a van of different view tours, and they take people around at least the canyon rim and make the claims that the canyon was formed by Noah's flood. And then a riverboat trip of that Canyon Ministries that takes people summer after summer down the canyon. And the leaders then that are coming along with it tell them some stories, and I'll refer to one of those at least here in a few minutes. This one came from an individual who had saw the book, read the book, and when he was younger was influenced so much by young Earth creationism, and he writes this: growing up as a young Earth creationist, I thought Noah's flood carved the Grand Canyon just a few thousand years ago. I feel liberated from that view now and would enjoy seeing and savoring the canyon firsthand. I am so very grateful to the authors for writing this book, for sharing their love of the Grand Canyon and helping me understand that I can appreciate and study its wonders without denying the Bible. So that was another one that was super encouraging to me. Here in Tulsa, we have a Tulsa World newspaper, and I got to know the religion editor, and he did an interview with me. and he wrote this article then that was published in the Tulsa World, calling it Grand Canyon, a battlefield in the age of Earth dispute. And I like his first words, a great divide. And that's somewhat really what has happened about the story of the canyon, which is something, of course, the divide is inside the church, not out in the geological community. So that's a little bit how it was inspired and received. Now I'll step through a number of summary of the contents that we have there. We first identify the two predominant views that are being discussed, and that is the flood geology viewpoint from the young Earth creation community, and then the modern geology and the frame of reference that all of us as the authors have. We have inside the book a list of the various things that are commented about flood geology and modern geology, and then just a couple of those at size that you can easily read. They claim the Earth is about 6,000 years old, and the radiometric dating methods, which is part of my specialty, for dating geological materials are flawed and inaccurate, and that Noah's flood occurred about 4,400 years ago and formed this canyon. Whereas in the book, and those of us in modern geology, recognize that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and our radiometric dating methods that have been developed over the last 100 years are in fact reliable in understanding the formation of igneous rocks, and that based on the geological observations that I will show you here in the rest of this talk, Noah's flood just could not have formed this canyon. It is not a single event of rising water, rising water, rising water that is described in the Genesis account. Here is the geologic timescale for a quick frame of reference. Our discussions will be here about the Paleozoic, and the Paleozoic is the spread of the sequence of rocks that are sitting in the Grand Canyon. Then above the Grand Canyon, the next sequence is the Mesozoic, and the Mesozoic is the era of the dinosaurs. Back to the Paleozoic. The Paleozoic is the window of time of a lot of marine shells as corals and things like that got developed, the age of lots of plants, and then succeeded then by the age of the dinosaurs, Mesozoic. And then Cenozoic is basically the age of mammals. The flood geology community claims that the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic were formed by Noah's flood, as I'll show here on some of the other diagrams. So there's the context. So the Grand Canyon itself, and that's the Paleozoic, as I showed from the time scale there that I just showed you. And then this is the Mesozoic, which is the period of the dinosaurs. All of this sequence of sediments is referred to by geologists as the grand staircase, because these would be the sediments between the Grand Canyon, which is in northern Arizona, and then going northward in Utah past Zion Canyon, and then eventually up to Bryce Canyon. Those all are representative of Mesozoic, and then Bryce Canyon is in the lower period of the Cenozoic. The dinosaur tracks, these little footprints that are here in the Mesozoic, are the formations in which dinosaur bones are found. Okay? So that's the context. Now, flood geologists sort of add a note here. The Paleozoic they refer to as early flood. That is the first 150 days of that year. Then they go to the late flood, referring to days 151 to the end of the year. So that's the kind of thing that they are proposing to the church with that viewpoint. Just plain simple geology that along with my teaching in petroleum engineering, I had a very popular course that was quite a bit of my career that was geology for non-geologists. And I would teach it to oil companies where they had staff that are not geologists, that they want to give their staff members an opportunity to learn about some of the terminology that the geologists are using when they do their work in discovering oil and the processes of how we drill for oil and things like that. So I had about 10 years of being able to teach that class over and over to many people and dozens of times. So this was one of the slides that I used for that in describing a sedimentary sequence, and the older rocks are on the bottom and the younger rocks are on top, of course, just the logic. Now, this light band just below the top of the rim is one that's distinctive, and that's called the Coconino sandstone that I'm going to comment about. And then the other one that shows up here is the red wall limestone that is right across the middle like that. And red wall limestone because, in fact, you can see that it's a red and the pretty vertical walls that are there. And it's a limestone. All right. In any basin that geologists work, they identify different formations as different environments of deposition, and we always apply names to the sequence of rocks for the sake of communicating with each other. So there is the Coconino sandstone that I'm going to talk a little bit about, and it's right up at the near the rim, not the top, but near close to the top. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the red wall limestone. So part 2 of the book then gets into how does geology work. We talk about sedimentary rocks. We talk about how they form. We talk about the structure that we find. And we recognize that the laws of nature are such that we can use current processes that we see and understand on the surface of the earth. And what do those sediments end up being distributed? Give us the opportunity to understand what happened in the past in terms of how were the various formations prepared and formed, and how did they come into existence. To give an example, limestone is primarily from coral reefs, so that's one example. And sandstones are typically like at a shoreline with the oceans or rivers transporting sand. Now, one of the things really significant about geology is we solve problems and puzzles in terms of the relative way that different things, the sequence that has taken place. So in this chapter, we show examples if we have tracks of a motorcycle or tracks of somebody walking across other tracks, you can decipher the sequence of how the sediments were being deposited. So for example, down here in this part of the diagram, you can see beds that are dipping deep in the lower portion of that. So those were sediments that were laid down horizontally. Then tectonics had lifted them up, so they were now dipping. There was a time of erosion across the top of those dipping sediments and other sediments laid on top horizontally. And then finally, in this case, a canyon that was carved down into it. So we solve problems like that in terms of describing the geologic history of an environment, and those are the sequences that would happen as we looked at the Grand Canyon. We have a chapter on how radiometric dating works, and the nickname for that is a title we titled it, "So Just How Old Is That Rock?" was our title at that point. And so that's really the kingpin to telling the period of time, and when we can say then how many years ago the different sedimentary formations in the Paleozoic occurred. Now, this is an example where the folks that are taken through the canyon are described something as inaccurately. I think I get that. I get that on a little. I come back to this a little bit later then again. So this is where my name is in there. Brian Tapp was the department chairman of geology here at the University of Tulsa, and he and I wrote this book, these two chapters about the broken and bent rocks. And this is down in a carbon, an area called Carbon Creek, and these sediments are folded tightly, and they have lots of fractures in them. And one of the things that we'll come back to this then and talk about a little bit about what flood geologists have said about this particular area. We have a whole section on fossils and what those stories can tell by understanding the fossils. Those that are large, let's see, animal fossils that are in the Grand Canyon and the staircase, tiny plants that can lead us to significant understanding of the environments, and then trace fossils of footprints and imprints of past life that have occurred. In the book, we have chapters of a record of the various fossil animals. We have a record of the fossil plants, and then the trace fossils written by David Elliott are the footprints, and there's some examples that are shown there. Carving the canyon is significant, and that was it is complicated because the plateau of these Paleozoic sediments is such that plate tectonics lifted that whole area of what is referred to as the Colorado Plateau, lifted it significantly because it's up at about 7,000 or 8,000 feet now, where the sediments were laid down at sea levels. So the riddle is, how did what was the long-term sequence of how those things developed? Let's see, we had a chapter on how old is the canyon. That is, what was the sequence of actually eroding it? Joel Duff, the biologist, wrote a chapter that talked about the various life that was in the canyon. And then toward the end of the book, then Greg Davidson and Wayne Ranney wrote a chapter that if you're actually taking a trip to the canyon, you can and make a decision to go down, walk down into the canyon. They have a chapter where they just described starting at the river and coming up through all the Paleozoic sedimentary formations to put the puzzle together. And then finally, a concluding chapter where we sort of put the conclusions on the line and emphasize that it's not just a difference of worldview in terms of flood geology. It's just is not describing the Grand Canyon the way it could have possibly occurred. So here was one endorsement also that a person gave to me that I want to share. The book provides an accessible explanation of how rocks and rock layers have formed over time. Roughly half of the volume is devoted to this tutorial, which is understandable by practically anyone who can read. This is one of the best introductions to geology I have ever seen. This section alone would make this book worthwhile purchase, even if one has little interest in creationism. So Scott Buchanan is actually a chemist, so he was acknowledging that he felt we did really well in describing the geology as a principle of how we learned about history. So let's shift now to, can Noah's flood explain, and what are some of the issues? Well, one comment made by flood geologists is that this 4,000 feet of layer cake sediments, they look between the layers and we don't see erosion or significant channels. That's one. And number two, they say mountains have arisen since the flood. We're going to look at this point about looking at layers and we don't see erosion. All right. There's a little segment, and you can see that this formation, this whole formation is the red wall limestone rock, okay? Notice how there is a 400-foot valley that has been cut down into the top of that red wall limestone. Very clear evidence that that top of that limestone was exposed to weathering and erosion such that a river was carved down into the top of the red rock limestone. Then the geologists who were describing these sediments that filled in that valley, they called it the Surprise Canyon. They found that in the lower part, there were terrestrial and land fossils, okay? So it was clearly not flooding all the time. And then marine fossils came in once sea level had risen and covered the red wall limestone later. Here is a section of the red wall limestone that clearly shows caves that have been eroded down into it or dissolved out. When we find caves today, they are virtually always in limestones, and the caves and holes are there because with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, rainfall is slightly acidic, so it dissolves out some of the limestone and leaves caves behind. And you hear of, fabulous caves in various parts of the world. Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. We have caves in Missouri, north here, not about 2-hour drive from where I am. So this is clear evidence that the red wall limestone was in fact exposed to the atmosphere. It was not a continuous sequence of flooding as claimed by flood geologists. Limestones are formed, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, on coral reefs. So this is just an example of somewhere in the tropics of corals that are growing. Now, just as I was preparing some of the content of this topic to send it out to Randy and the rest of your team, of all things, there was somebody that's a young Earth creationist who's a biologist from Centerville University, and he has done a lot of work on the canyon. And he makes the claim that the Coconino sandstone is not a desert sand, but he makes the claim that it was formed underwater. And he makes that commitment that it's, and I had a chance to listen to him just about a week and a half ago, because he was giving a webinar for this organization called Logos Research Associates. So there it is. It was January the 14th. So I delayed sending the content out to Randy a little bit and waited to hear what he had to say. And this was one of the very first slides that he showed me. He showed the audience, excuse me. And here's what I want to show you. You notice that he is describing the sediments as the sand layering with cross beds. He shows those cross beds at being perfectly straight, okay? Each one is straight as though it's parallel to each other. And I look over here, the picture that's right what he apparently describes, and they are distinctly not straight, okay? They are one dip angle and then it gets shallow, shallow, shallow. It's thicker here than it is there. Okay. And likewise. So he does a diagram, and he doesn't even have his diagram to match what shows up in the picture. And I'm thinking, hey, John, how do you write your diagram? What's the deal? Okay. The significant thing about sand dunes in a desert is that they traditionally can have bedding that is up to about 30 or maybe even 31, 32 degrees of declination, as shown in this specific diagram. All right. Then I'll show you in the next slide what John Whitmore did with that. This is another picture of the same Coconino sandstone, but this one is not in the Grand Canyon. I found this one online, and it is from Walnut Canyon, which is east of Flagstaff, because I wanted to give another example. See how they're steep here and they get more shallow. They're steep here and the beds get shallower dips, okay? So the significance of sand dunes in a desert is that they have higher dip angles than one finds with a marine deposit that is formed under seawater, is the bullet point. And that is one of the significant reasons that geologists recognize that these are formed in a desert sand dune. However, well, here's one thing that the professor said. He said that Coconino sandstone is the centerpiece for the old Earth argument, and to me, that's kind of nonsense. Is that the Coconino sandstone is not the centerpiece? The whole Grand Canyon is the centerpiece. So that's just part of our story that we could understand. The specific points that we make in our book is that there are raindrop prints on page 69. We have those steep beds, and we have animal tracks, and I'm just showing a couple of them that then are those in those representative pages in the book. So he doesn't recognize that the book has been promoted nicely. But in World Magazine, we were able to get an ad, and in Christianity Today, and then it was also reported in the Geological Society of America, which we were able to go and exhibit it at those annual meetings to help to market the book. Well, here's one that story that a flood geologist, Andrew Snelling, commented about, which I mentioned briefly before, but I want to dig in more details. Thick sequence of sedimentary layers as seen in the Tapete sandstone. The Tapete sandstone is the lowest of the flood deposits at the base of the Paleozoic. The lowest of the flood deposited layers are found that have been folded while still soft very soon after deposition, indicative of all the deposition and the upheaval responsible for folding being one event. Well, folks, that just turns out to be false. Okay. There's that carbon canyon. And there's more, there's a at large scale the what I showed you before. Andrew Snelling takes people down the river and he says there are no fractures in those rocks. Well, Brian Tapp can find the fractures just from the pictures. Doesn't even have to go down to the canyon to find the fractures. All right. The other significant thing is that these were not soft sediments because the nature of the fold is such that the axis of the fold has rotated in that these two red lines are at different angles because some of the layers were harder than others. So they were hard or soft, dependent. They had different constituencies. That was not all soft. Soft sediment deposition doesn't look anything like this. So Andrew Snelling is just telling people a false story. So there's the canyon again, and the staircase that goes on up into Utah to Bryce Canyon that I mentioned a little bit earlier. This is the geologic sequence showing the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic and the flood deposits as claimed by flood geologists. And beyond the Cretaceous, or younger than Cretaceous, they refer to as post-flood. Well, a catastrophic flood is going to mix up, land and marine things. And this is from that big tsunami that hit Japan that damaged the nuclear power plant. And everything is chaos. All right. The sedimentary layers that we see in the Grand Canyon are, they're sandstones or they're limestones. They're not all mixed up. All right. So this is more the case of the way the Grand Canyon is, because there were successive depositional environments that could establish the layers. And it's exactly what we see in the nomenclature of the sequence of sediments as I've been describing to you in the geologic sections. So here is that red wall limestone. This is a group. Up there's the Coconino sandstone, the two that I talked about. So the areas that are blue are more marine deposits in the sense that they're sandstones and shales. And then the limestones, are that becomes another environment, and then successively alternating shales and sandstones. In this case, then dune deposits of the sandstone. Now, interestingly, here's another example of in the Devonian that filling in a valley in this mauve limestone, there was terrestrial sediments and then later marine sediments. So they're separated because of a changing environment, not a catastrophic series of events. I'm going to make some comments now about some of the fossils. These are marine reptiles. All right. These are marine mammals. And if they all lived at the same time, they should be mixed up. Well, the marine reptiles are those that are in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, which flood geologists say is basically late flood deposits. But the others that are mammals are post-flood. So they end up with wrestling with where the flood deposits are, and they just don't account for what's actually in the canyon, because these are distinctly different animals that lived in very different time periods, not all in one year. This shows plants that have pollen and leaves things of that type. And for anybody that has allergy problems, pollen like this you can see why it's so nasty to somebody who is afflicted with those kinds of things. And they find that there are none of these kind of plant materials or this kind of pollen is in the Grand Canyon at all. It's all Cenozoic, all right? So in the Grand Canyon, of birds, dinosaurs, mammals, or flowers, turns out none of these are in the Grand Canyon at all. They are all they're all Cenozoic, they're all Mesozoic or Cenozoic, and none are in the canyon. So the canyon cannot be continuous with all the sediments that are up above in the grand staircase. It just doesn't fit together that way. So the answer is a big no. So can it explain? Yeah, I just said it's big no. Okay. Now, how should the church respond? What should we do with this? All right. Well, if we want to minister to inside the body of Christ truthfully, and we reach out to the lost, we need to be telling truthful stories. This is an example of one of the exhibit halls that we had at a meeting, and that's my wife, Helen. So we've gone to a number of the geological societies as the book came out in 2016. We got to the Geological Society of America, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, the American Geophysical Union, and so that the science community became aware that we had this book for them as fellow geologists in the profession, may run across people in their own hometowns and in their spheres of influence, wherever those are. So the questions that we sought to answer in the book, can explain the Grand Canyon, and of course that's a big no. We address those questions. Why are there no dinosaur bones or mammal bones that are fossils in the canyon? How do we know the radiometric dating methods are reliable? We address that question. How can we tell what happened in the unobserved past? We compare to what's happening today. And then how long did it take to carve the canyon? The carving roughly has worked out to probably been mostly carved by the Colorado River over about the last 5 to 6 million years is the sort of the tail end of the story, or the ultimate sort of answer. And then, is young earth creationism really biblical? Well, the Bible just doesn't tell us about the nature of the Bible doesn't give us the history of the earth in that sense, and it certainly doesn't describe the Grand Canyon. So when Christian scientists are presenting data, should they fully disclose the evidence? My argument is yes, and we always try to be honest in presenting everything we have and giving our best. And then how does it reflect on Christianity when the flood geologists cherry pick things and describe conflicting results, and they leave out lots of data, which is just frustrating for me as a Christian and as a geologist. David Elliott was one of our authors that I mentioned earlier, and he is not a believer. But one time, and he lives in Flagstaff, Arizona, and is a professor there at the university that's located there. And one time he heard that a young earth creationist was speaking at a local church, and he just decided to go and see what this was like. And he came away from that and he told me, he said, I have never heard so much misinformation packed into 1 hour talk. And he misused and abused my own data. So a Christian could never, uh, you know, figure that somebody like David Elliott, even if we were inclined to, would be willing to listen to people who are so dishonest. Why does it matter? Well, to me, it matters because of the witness of the church. To discredit the truth of the church that holds in common is just runs chills up my spine. Okay, and then our youth are leave the faith, and from significant surveys that have been done, the way that the church has handled science is one of about six topics that these young people that have left comment about, in that the church is just not up to speed, and church is being dishonest about, in this case, geology, but science in general also. It's very sad. I know personally of about five or six people that have heard of that have basically left the faith significantly because of the young earth creationism movement. There's a geologist here in Tulsa that I had a conversation with at one point, and she said she grew up in a young earth church, and that was certainly one of the uh, factors that had caused her to move away from her faith. And what I'm doing right now is I have enough of a rapport that my wife and I get together with her on an occasional basis. So I'm praying for her healing of that wound that she had with hearing a false story, and that she could forgive those people that were telling her lies, and I'm praying for her salvation, or she can come back into the faith as either I or somebody else gets the opportunity to sit down with her and say, we don't become Christians because of watching other Christians necessarily, because of things like this that we run across, the way it's been handled. So many are feel compelled to leave the faith on the mistaken notion that science and the Bible are hopelessly at odds. Flood geology marches its adherents inexorably down this road. Science, as described in the pages of this book, does not. Part of as we finished up that last chapter. Does it matter? It certainly does, because truth always matters. Those are my stories of the Grand Canyon. We have a magnificent creator. And I'll tell you my experience of visiting. The first time I visited the canyon, I was 16 years old, and my parents and I were driving out to California to attend our church conference, annual conference, which was out there. And my dad had been to the canyon before. So he was determined, as we went to the canyon, we were going to go down into the canyon. So we did, and we hired the mules, and we took the mule ride down. And we found that we learned that it was 7 miles down. And when we finally got back up to the top, it felt like we had gone 77 miles, because we had not been riding our horses at all in the recent time when we went there. And we were so sore we could hardly stand up when we got off the mules. So that was my experience of going down the canyon. That's the story. Open for questions. Discard. There we go. All right, Randy, Jim, say Matt, David, Cliff, Carrie, Barbara, have questions? I'm not
I have
here.
a question.
Oh, unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. This, makes sense, and I don't have any problem accepting it because it's so logical. But I remember, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, the Young Earth Creationists put out a film, and it was in the theaters like for a day or so, and then it moved on. But they pointed to one area that was quite a ways down where the earth looked like it had been in a turmoil. It didn't look like it was in layers. And they used this as an example of where the flood caused this movement of the earth so far down. And I'm just wondering, what is the explanation for that movement of the earth when it obviously couldn't have been a layer?
Yeah. Um,
Do you know what I'm
because
talking about?
well, I don't know. Did that movie happen to be Is Genesis History? Or do you remember the title? Or maybe
Oh,
not.
the name of the movie?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, oh, well, it was done by the guy who did I think the Ark and that Young Earth creationist. So,
Okay. Your sense is it came from Answers in Genesis, maybe?
well, they're promoting that, but
Or
this
they were
movie,
promoting it. Okay.
yeah, this movie was like I say, it was shown in theaters and for a short time. And anyway, it's
Well,
always
one of the big ones I know that was shown, it was Genesis History, and I did go and watch that one. And that was produced by somebody right in Nashville, Tennessee. Um, and in that case, the producer actually had Del Tackett was the
yes,
narrator. Okay,
yeah.
that's one that was pop. That was one of the most popular ones. Okay, Del Tackett, but Del Tackett didn't realize that when he was speaking, he was spreading the lies that the producer had put in his mouth when he took that. Even as he was beginning to talk about a rock that was declared as old, and he knew it was as young as he was. Uh, the producer of the movie actually that was potassium argon dating claimed on Mount St. Helens. And the problem was you cannot ever do radiometric dating on young igneous rocks less than like 50,000 years or 100,000 years old. So that whole story that Del Tackett was just a story of deceit because they were seeking to demonstrate that radiometric dating does not work when they were presenting the case completely falsely.
Hmm.
Now, the folding part, there are many places that we find on the face of the earth where rocks are folded heavily. In the Colorado Rockies, they'll be folded. That's from plate tectonics. That is not from catastrophic flooding. Those rocks are already hard before they are folded. So that is a very common theme that they young earth creation confuses the public with those kind of things.
Well, that would make sense because plate tectonics has altered the Earth in so many ways, and we didn't even understand it until what, a couple hundred years ago. So,
Plate tectonic, the actual transition from the current plate tectonic paradigm was a transition that actually kicked right as I was starting graduate school in 1966. There was an annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union in Washington, D.C., and that's considered sort of the summit time period when the geoscience community had learned enough about the ocean basins that they realized that the tectonic plates were moving and the Atlantic Ocean basin had been slowly separated because of plate tectonic activity from movement of the mantle rock down below the oceanic crust. So, and then I was able, 50 years later, I went to the 2017 annual meeting of that same organization in New Orleans, and they had a session on plate tectonics. And some of the professors and my colleagues from Columbia University were there at that 50th anniversary celebration. And so that was kind of neat to realize that I had been there at that significant meeting because of data that had been collected by the geoscience community for the 1950s, 1940s, and 50s, and right into the 60s. And of course, it keeps on going now. So plate tectonics, built the Himalaya mountains.
Hmm. Yeah.
You have a question?
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Other
Hey,
people on Zoom want to ask a question? Go ahead.
yeah, Matt here. I'll go ahead and ask the question. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, I can.
good. Hey, I love the book. I picked it up myself at the Grand Canyon a couple years ago. And Ken, I think you reached out to me years ago about Genesis Apologetics here in Sacramento. I went to one of their conferences.
Oh, did you? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the G1 conference. So I've been there
Yes.
once or twice, and so I think we had a little correspondence like maybe 6 years ago or something. It's been a while.
Incidentally, they're doing another one here in February.
Yeah, I went to it last year. Past couple years I've been there, and
Yeah.
I posted a comment in the chat here. They showed their movie Ark in the Darkness a while ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just like all the other young earth stuff.
Yeah.
Very very common arguments.
Did
I guess
Matt, did we exchange any emails?
I think so, yeah. And I think I took some pictures and some notes, and I think I sent that over to you. I want to say it was 2021, maybe, or maybe
Okay.
no.
Well,
I don't think it was during
I'm
COVID.
prone maybe to watch it again.
Yeah,
And because I think I'd like to go ahead and pick up and call the president of Jessup University
Turn that
and,
off.
share with him what those guys are doing to him
yeah,
if I can. So
yeah,
I'd be pleased to be in touch with you
yeah,
in that regard.
yeah.
You should see my email. Yeah, there's my email right on the screen right now.
Yeah,
Wolgemuth 2 at AOL.
yeah, got it. Yeah, I'll send you an email. I went last year, and I was thinking of going again this year. And if it helps, to give a report on it or something, back to you or whoever else. I'd definitely do it again.
Yeah.
And but
If I know you're there, that'll sort of stimulate my interest in
yeah,
trying to watch it.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? I'll go it. I'll go this year. It's no big deal to me, and it's always interesting for me to keep up on what their current arguments are, what they're teaching everybody. Yeah, I guess one question I think I was going to ask was you have the book here about Grand Canyon, but if there's any other place in the country here that receives nearly as much attention, you mentioned already is Mount St. Helens. Is there maybe any
Well,
book?
yeah, there are two. The biggest one is the Grand Canyon,
Yeah.
but they've made a big deal about Mount St. Helens.
Oh yeah.
And when they describe it as though geologists said it takes millions of years. And that's baloney because geologists
Right.
never say that. That
Right.
happened in just a couple of days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and the sediments there were loose,
Right.
fairly loose, volcanic ash.
Hmm.
So they're eroded out easily. It doesn't take long.
Yeah, exactly. They're loosely
Yeah.
consolidated
So again,
ash.
they're designed to deceive people in conflicting
Yeah.
communication and
Yeah. and the argument you mentioned it already, that the argument about what was it, the dating of St. Helens rocks,
Yeah,
that
potassium
comes up
argon. Yeah,
every single time. You talk to somebody in young Earth, that comes up. So that's just it. Just never that argument never dies out.
yeah.
So, but
Now,
yeah,
did you have another specific question? Go ahead.
no, I don't have any other specific question. I'll send you an email,
Yeah.
and I'll plan to go to the G1 conference this year and
Okay.
see what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for the talk today.
You're very welcome. Yep. This is one of my favorites. With all the blood, sweat, and tears I put into the book. No, it was a delight to do. It was just very intense. And I was just so thankful when I could raise the money and get a book out there published full color at $30. In fact, at Amazon now it's about 20, 22, 23. There are roughly, it went to a third printing. So the full print run now with this third printing is just shy of 10,000. I think it's 9,500 or something like that.
Hi. I'm in a Bible study in my church,
Yeah.
studying Hebrews.
Mhm.
And I mean, the folks around me are very sharp people,
Yeah.
very well read. Some of them are very young Earth. And I only hope that the USGS guy that's also brilliant will be in that class too. But when we go over the God's day of grace, I'm going to make the point that this is the seventh day and God is resting, and the geological record bears that out very clearly. And if this day, the seventh day, is long, why not all the others? What problems am I going to run into saying that? Do you see something that's going to come up and bite me?
What I do, and why don't you take my email also and send me a message? Because as I look at just reading Genesis 1 slowly, we see that in the beginning God created, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, and it's dark. And then, and God said, that's the beginning of day one. And as it goes through that, verse 3 or 4 says, daylight is one day, the darkness he called, the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. So in that verse, light would be 12 hours. It's not 24 hours. And then there's only 3 places where the word create are used. Verse 1, and then it's, I think, at about 14, and then at the end when God created man. Days at least 3 and 4 in there, it says, and God said, let the earth bring forth plants and leaves after their kind. Let the earth bring forth animals after their kinds.
Is that a thought?
So for me, if the earth is bringing forth trees, trees don't pop into existence in 24 hours. It takes time to grow. The wording suggests these trees are growing. The grass is growing. It is not created miraculously, fully mature with tree rings. So the text itself gives clues that the definition of day as useful in Genesis 1 is the third definition. It's not 12 hours, it's not 24 hours. It's a longer period of time with an ending, with a beginning and an ending.
Yeah, they're going to blow me off because I'm taking too much class in the time if I go that route.
That could be. That could be.
No,
But
that's exactly what they'll do.
yeah, but that's the theme that the support for those days being 24 hours is really rather weak. The Jewish 24-hour day is from sunset to sunset. It is not evening to morning. That's 12 hours. So so I think they're, but the phrase I use is it's a poor reading of the text.
If
And
I can interject one comment.
what's that? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could, Hugh Ross has written quite a bit about this, and he's a couple of books. I can't think of the titles, but he deals with this whole issue of Genesis 1. So I think it would be, a good exercise to look that up and read it.
Yeah,
It'll give you
one
some
of
of
the
the
books,
answers.
that
well,
would be
one
a
of the
good
books
book. Yeah.
one of the books is a matter of days that he's
Yeah,
written.
that's it. That's
And
probably it.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to be able to bring that up in class.
They can't handle it.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had been with them when they went through the Genesis study, but
Okay.
that's water under the bridge.
Okay.
Well, I covet your prayers, and they're
That's for
going to
sure.
bring
Let
up,
me and send me an email. I'll be praying for you.
thank you. And they're going to
Yeah.
bring up apparent age. And the answer to that is apparent age, like all kinds of apparent truth, is completely indifferentiable from an apparent lie. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Hi again, Randy.
Yeah, I'm a question. Do is the flood geologist position, is that a position only because they've bought into a young Earth position and therefore have to try to justify in some manner the geological formations? Or are there
Yeah,
people who
yes.
flood geologists who don't have that presupposition? Is it always that presupposition that leads to the flood geologist?
Well, the integral combination of young earth creationism is God created an earth and then the whole thing was destroyed by the flood and all changed. Well, the mountains weren't made by Noah's flood. Uh, that 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 just does not fit reality in any way. And they have something called catastrophic plate tectonics, as though the plates were moving at maybe 5 miles per hour, and they tell that to the church people, and they don't know that is the physics of rocks that is totally impossible. So therefore, they just have to appeal to, well, God did all this miraculously in in 6 24-hour days, and they don't address it um, with any sense of integrity of the behavior of the materials of which they are talking about, because rocks have certain properties, and catastrophic plate tectonics, those aren't real rocks. Those are just numbers in a computer model.
Mhm. Why do you think there's so many people in the church today that have adopted the young Earth creationist position? Do you think it's from ignorance of other positions, or they're very well spoken, or very persuasive, or what? How would you explain that?
Um, I think it is because about 5 or 6 PhDs have basically gone rogue abandon integrity and tell these stories like Andrew Snelling that those rocks were soft. And so the person that's not a scientist appeal to these flood geologists and say, oh, they have PhDs and they have a different view than you do. But they don't have the skill set or the determination to go and look into what Andrew Snelling is saying to hear that it's false. And so it becomes a fixed religious viewpoint that if that goes away, basically they feel they've lost faith. They've lost their faith.
Mhm.
And it's sold very, it's if people don't have some bit of sense of science and what the possibilities are, they get carried away by going through the Creation Museum and going through the Ark. And they don't realize that the science content in those locations is false.
I know, having many years ago been influenced by the young Earth creationists and really having adopted that view before I heard anything else.
Yeah.
I know a number of the young Earth creationists view that as a litmus test for genuine faith. That if you don't believe that, then somehow you're compromising on the
Yeah.
Bible, and if you're compromising the Bible, then you basically don't have a legitimate faith.
Well, and that's just a big bold lie that Ken Ham builds into the story, and it's just a lie.
Yes.
Yeah, but it indeed, and a lot of it is animal death before the fall.
Yes.
They even go and take the same. If animals died before the fall, then Christ's death on the cross was meaningless. Well, that's just that's just bullshit. That's so far out.
That's a good term.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But see, if somebody like a PhD says that to a believer inside the Christian community, that's bone rattling to hear that Christ's death on the cross. It's not true at all. It's just sheer nonsense. And it's not compromising their faith at all.
Yes, and your comment on particularly young people leaving the faith, I think, is a very, very serious
Yeah.
warning because of that. And seeing if this is not true, then how can we believe the rest of the scripture? I think it's very dangerous.
And
Yeah.
there are speakers, yeah, they say compromising, um, and just what that then Christ's death on the cross was meaningless. I mean, that's just crazy. But it's used as a scare tactic. I think of Ken Ham as a snake oil salesman.
Mhm.
Even when he did that debate with Bill Nye the Science Guy on the screen, even though he talked about salvation and the meaning of salvation, right on the screen behind him, he had junk science stuff showing in the video screens. Yes, next question
Hi. Well,
Hi.
actually, not so much a question, but
or comment.
partly a question. Isn't the real issue here that we have people following an ideology rather than seeking to serve God
Oh,
first?
yes. Oh, absolutely.
And actually, all of these arguments, I've just kind of simplified it, and I said that the young Earth creationists have turned God into a magician who's waving a magic wand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the old Earth creationists understand that he is the master designer.
Yeah.
And the more that science sees, the more we're able to see. And of
Yep.
course, God has given us the ability to see more and more and more. The more we see in the universe and in subatomic, down into at the Well, subatomic, yes, but I was trying to get down to string theory and below.
Small,
But
small sizes. Yeah.
yeah, the quantum level.
Yeah.
Uh, the more we're seeing at that level, we can't find the end of it. We haven't been able to find the end of anything. We're finding more and more and more.
Mhm.
So this complexity is unimaginable. But
Just
the
think
reason,
of DNA, what we know about DNA
well,
today
and
compared to 10 years ago.
right, and actually the cell wall is even more complex than DNA as far as that
Yep.
goes.
Yeah.
But the real point for any believer is that how do I know and serve the Father? And we're commanded to have unity in the body. So how do we accomplish this unity in the body? But the difficulty we're facing is these people are clinging to an ideology.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And you can't reason with anyone who's clinging to an ideology.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that when I was 12, essentially became an atheist. I was raised Lutheran,
Hmm.
and no one there would answer my questions. No one there would actually engage with me. There was a
Wow.
physicist who was over the middle school level, and when a friend and I wanted to try to prove that the virgin birth was false using some Jewish records, he was actually afraid of two 12-year-olds. And that I totally lost all respect for them at that point. I thought, if you're afraid of a 12-year-old, you've got a problem, fella.
Yeah.
But there's the difficulty with the church. The church isn't dealing with the level of the people who are coming up. There are those who are extremely bright and all levels of capability, and they leave a lot of people behind. But we see in C.S. Lewis, for example, that he had to be convinced logically first, and that had nothing to do with creation. It was not a creation argument, it was a logical argument about reality and truth.
Yeah.
But again, how do we deal? I have friends online who are young Earth creationists, and a couple people actually blew me away completely.
Mm.
One young lady in Singapore, I'm still gently communicating with, but not on that subject. And my point is, I come alongside her as a friend and a brother in Christ. That's how I relate to her. I don't
And try
relate to
to
her.
try to keep that warm and let her have
Yeah.
a
And I won't relate to her on that other level at all. I
yeah,
just won't get
that's
into that.
best. Yeah.
So to me, that's where we need to focus our attention to
Yeah. The
increasing
young
the
earth
brotherhood.
the young earth movement is basically a 20th century basically came into the evangelical church because of Henry Morris and John Whitcomb's Genesis flood. So it's been here for 60 years, capturing lots of people's attention.
I read that when I first became a believer, but it didn't exactly hold me.
Yeah, well,
Anyway, God bless
I
you.
didn't even hear. I grew up in a very conservative church in the Brethren in Christ Mennonite sort of Anabaptist tradition. And I never even heard of this young earth creation material. So to me, it never even existed before 1961. And then I saw it I saw that book in graduate school in 1970, and I realized it's a piece of trash. And then later I learned it actually is even plagiarized from the New Geology by an author from the 1923. And Henry Morris never gave him acknowledgement for taking it from George McCreary Price. And I
By the
had
way, remind me, what is the title of your book? I need to buy it off Amazon.
it's the Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Yeah. I actually had the opportunity to sit down with John Whitcomb, Henry Morris's co-author, and I was just listening to how he'd connected with Henry Morris and what their conversations were. Then I listened to that whole thing. And then toward the end, I asked him, I said, do you realize that a lot of his geology content is inaccurate? And to both my wife and I, we thought that John Whitcomb was just totally surprised. It's like John Whitcomb was basically a theological sort of sidekick to give his book, I guess, credibility in the church community. But Whitcomb had no idea that it was geological junk. So, yes, go ahead. Your question.
So we've got under the YEC model, the Earth's crust is moving on the average 5 miles an hour or so, and this accounts for features like the Marianas Trench and Mount Everest and the Andes Mountains and everything else. So how do they account for us being able to find the Tigris and Euphrates rivers?
Well, their view is they believe that the Tigris-Euphrates River, that the whole Earth was changed completely with Noah's flood 4,400 years ago. So they would argue that Tigris-Euphrates rivers, wherever they were no longer there. Were just changed completely by this catastrophic flood. But the catastrophic plate tectonic model does not in any way represent reality. That is just a computer model with imaginary numbers put in there to make it run at 5 miles an hour. Those are not rocks that really exist. They're not even rocks anymore.
What they're saying is the Tigris and Euphrates rivers disappeared and reappeared differently?
They say they don't know where they were originally. So it's just baloney. I actually had the opportunity to have dinner with John Baumgartner, who wrote the models. And I asked him, if you put the rock properties of oceanic basalts, which make up the ocean crust, if you put the real rock properties of things like Young's modulus, which is a property of the rock, and Poisson's ratio, which is a property of the rock, if you put those rock properties into your model, how fast do the plates move? And he said, oh, about 1 to 5 inches a year, just what we see. So he, as a programmer, just put in properties to force the plates to go at 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. So those are not real rocks. Those are just numbers in a computer model.
Anyone else have a question?
Yeah.
Other questions? Anyone on Zoom that hasn't had a chance to ask a question? Please unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. Okay. Well, I know Ken is from Tulsa, so he's on a two time zones, I believe, right? Ahead of us?
That's fine, but I typically don't go to bed till 11:30 anyway. So
okay, well then we have another hour or so. So
if you want it,
wait a second, I didn't mean that. So
I know.
Well, I do have a question.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, you mentioned Jessup University.
Yeah.
Do they teach the young Earth?
Their president, I think, isn't that right, Matt? This conference is being held at the university, I believe.
Yeah, it's a conference. It's put on by Genesis Apologetics, which is a young Earth organization in Folsom. and they do an annual conference. And for the past couple years, it's been held at Jessup. I believe this
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
this year it's February 28th at Jessup.
Well, our
And the
church
president
is
of the
having,
university gives one of the talks.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, our church is having a series of sermons by I believe he's the chancellor of Jessup University. He retired last year. I think my
Okay.
memory may not serve me right, but he's doing exposition on Ephesians, and so I'm kind of curious if Jessup teaches the young Earth uh,
I would
theory.
I would say they have to if the president is going to stand on the podium and basically endorse these people that are presenting a whole series of junk science.
Well, I'll have to get your book and give it to the chancellor and see what he says.
Please do. Yeah, the
Yeah.
person that founded Genesis Apologetics talks big and claims that he knows radiocarbon dating, but he does not know or understand radiocarbon dating because I've listened to him and he oh, and he's also using teenagers or young adults to be stooges in some of his short videos, making a mockery of science. So as far as I'm
Mm,
concerned, he's abusing young people in terms of theology and in integrity.
yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity, folks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You know, interestingly, we used to meet at Jessup University, and then for whatever reason we didn't work out for us to stay there, but it's interesting.
How far are you away from it? It's not right in
Um,
Sacramento, is
we're
it?
in it's in the Sacramento area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's in Roseville, so it's
Okay.
metropolitan area.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I just one other plug in our March meeting, so not next month, but the following month. Hugh Ross will actually be speaking on his new book, Noah's Ark Revisited. So
Yep.
if this would be a great follow-up on Ken's presentation tonight, looking at more of a broad scope of things and the theology and the science. So mark your calendars for March. And next month in February, we're going to be doing a little shift into biology. Rick Gerhardt, who's a instructor for a number of the Reasons Institute courses, which is the Reasons to Believe educational wing, is going to be speaking on a biologist's critique of evolution. And having taken a couple courses with him as an instructor, he's a very good teacher. I think it'll be very insightful also. In addition to what Ken was talking about, the young earth and so forth, another area that is, I think, critical to the church and for promoting truth to our young people who will be leaving the faith if they don't understand things is this whole idea of macro neo-Darwinian evolution. And it needs to be looked at critically. And I think Rick will do a great job of doing that. So just a plug for our
You, Ross,
next.
going to come up and do it in person, or are you going to do it webinar?
I think he'll do a webinar. Yeah. Since he's in Southern California.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, would you please include my email on for those two at least?
Yes.
Because
Yes, we will.
yeah, I had a
Absolutely.
privilege of reading the book ahead of time, and I've endorsed it. And I made Hugh's been pretty. They've been pretty good about when they get something a bit off on geochemistry that they'll listen and make some modifications, which I've appreciated.
Yes. Yeah, they're very committed to accuracy.
Yeah.
And there is a rumor, I can't confirm it right now, but there's a rumor, but there may be books available for people who attend in person in March.
Oh,
So
okay.
So I'm throwing that out as the tease. But if you come in person, if you're on Zoom, sorry, we don't have it for you. But if you come in person, we may have books. So take that for what it's worth. So anyway, if there are no other questions, I will conclude here. Again, Ken, we're so thankful for you being here tonight and for your lecture, and you're helping us to really understand the Grand Canyon. I know when I first saw it, I was driving across the country. I did a double take when I was driving. It's a good thing I kept my eyes on the road because it's an amazing place.
Yeah.
And having been able to go back to it, it's a wonderful, beautiful area of creation.